to Morning Movers. I'm Dan King Hall coming to you live from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Joining us now to discuss the state of the Fed and where we go from here, we've got Danielle DiMartino Booth, CEO and Chief Strategist, QI Research. Danielle, I'm so glad I get a chance to talk with you this morning. Off the back of the latest minutes from the Fed, plus you've got a lot of Fed speak happening today. We've got Fed Chair Jerome Powell speaking literally as we speak right now. Let's talk a little bit about the minutes. To me, my take was there was essentially near unanimous to cut rates with only essentially debate over how many cuts, not whether to cut. What's your take?
Well, I think that the minutes were a little bit more hawkish than what the market was anticipating. Yes, there are anticipations. A majority of the members of the Federal Open Market Committee do foresee one or two more rate hikes this year. But it was interesting that a handful also saw no need to hike rates at that last September the 17th meeting. So there's clearly still a wide disparity of views on the Federal Open Market Committee, with the majority remaining concerned that inflation upside is a concern going into the rest of the year. So I would say that we'll be interested to see what Powell has to say. He's only giving introductory remarks this morning, but it looks like the Fed is going to continue to be data dependent in what happens to be a data vacuum.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, and I know you may cut there earlier when you were speaking. But yes, that's my question, right? This is a data, they've said time and time again, Powell says this at every press conference, we remain data dependent, and, you know, we're not tied to a particular outcome, right? Even when they, you know, kind of talked about the leaning towards the risks to the labor market. At the same time, we did not get the most recent payrolls report. And even when the government reopens, it will take a little bit of time, not forever, for the labor market data. CPI will take longer, right? Because of how many inputs are there. So operating in this vacuum, and given your experience, having worked for this institution before, where do they go? Where do they take direction from?
Well, so Christopher Waller, Governor Waller, a few weeks before that last September meeting, did say that something of interest. ADP provides the Fed proprietary information in the middle of the month to tell them how the trends are looking. That had been deteriorating, according to Waller. And of course, we saw that play out in the ADP data. And here at QI, we also follow Google file unemployment, which has been a very long and steady determinant of what initial jobless claims would be. We would be discussing them right now. They would have just hit the wires at 8:30. And we saw something unusual in the latest week, and that was that seasonally, this last week ended October the 11th, bumped well off trend, search interest up 12%, whereas for that same week in 2022, 2023, and 2024, we actually saw appreciable declines in the number of Americans looking for unemployment, Googling, searching for file unemployment. So it certainly looks like the labor market continues to weaken. And of course, one has to hope that Fed policymakers, Fed officials, the staff, that they're also paying attention to these alternative sources of data until the government does get back up and running.
Danielle, let me ask you this. You've long said the Fed sometimes uses the minutes as a communications tool, right? Even to, you know, to use the term massage the market reaction. Yep. Do you think that's what happened here with the most recent minutes?
I think that it was pretty much a snapshot in time as it pertains to the labor market. But boy, again, when we're talking about inflation, there was definitely a reiteration, a hammering home of, and using the language, right? The majority felt that inflation was still the predominant source of concern going into October. That really was reiterated. Did it need to be? We don't know. But again, as you said, in 2008, Janet Yellen in 2008 FOMC transcript said, you know what, if the market doesn't get the message that we originally want to communicate when we release the statement, well, then we may as well use the minutes as another tool in the toolbox 3 weeks later to make sure they got what we were trying to see. Yesterday, I think we certainly heard them loud and clear. They're paying closer attention to inflation for the moment than the labor market.
When you think about the makeup of the Fed, you have Stephen Myron as the most recent addition. Now, he was that dissenter, right? We knew when you looked at initially the dot plot, and even when you look at the minutes, that he's the outlier. But what does that tell you about influence? Is there any potential kind of influence towards a certain path, or should we continue to perceive Myron as the outlier?
So I don't think that Fed officials, with the very public speeches that Myron has made since the FOMC met, I don't think that he has presented any compelling arguments that would sway the way they're thinking. He's basically saying, we hope that shelter inflation, because we know home prices are falling in increasing numbers of cities throughout America, that manifests in lower inflation going forward. Of course, Fed officials know that it's a very, very long lag time between when we actually see falling home prices and when that shows up in the data. And by the time it does, according to Myron himself, who's only put his job in the White House on hold for 4 months, he'll be back at the Council of Economic Advisors working for the administration again.
And Danielle, let me ask you one more question. I want to go back to the point you made earlier. You said that your view is that the market may be overestimating the path from here in terms of expectations for the amount of rate cuts this year. Why do you think that?
I'm simply going off the language of the minutes and the fact that there was some reticence on the part of several members of the committee to necessarily commit to 2 more rate cuts in 2025. I think that, especially because of the data vacuum and because markets have largely priced in another rate cut in October, I don't think the Fed's going to have enough time, even if the data starts to trickle out, to back off of that October rate cut. But it sure does tell you that the December 10th meeting is very much live and in play.
Great points there. Always love hearing your perspective. That's Danielle DiMartino Booth, CEO and Chief Strategist, QI Research. Thank you so much, Danielle, and have a great rest of your day.